That may be the greatest catch I've ever seen in my life.
Okay guys, this is kind of going to be more so a strategy video where I go through and I talk about what you should be doing with these late round picks. Now, I know that we have discussed the players that we want to be targeting, but in this video, I would rather tell you all about the player prototype that I am just kind of entirely avoiding at the very back half of these drafts. And essentially, it's going to come down to the fact that a lot of these players that you're going to be selecting in the third or fourth rounds, they are essentially just going to be roster cloggers. Now, these are going to be players that, yeah, you probably like them coming into the NFL draft. Maybe you really like the situation they landed in. But if we are trying to see how things shake out and we go, what is the overall upside here? I mean, what is the upside for a player getting drafted in this range of the draft, eventually not even becoming someone that can win you your league? Because we know that very rarely are you ever going to find the Tyreek Hill. Very rarely are you ever going to find the James Robinson from the fourth round that can come in and can be an impact player for you every single week. No, but instead, let's go through and let's look at the players that we have to say, okay, how hard is it going to be for them to ever just reach being worth a first-round rookie pick in a future class? Because a lot of the time, what you want to do with these rookie picks in the later rounds is you want to be just trying to get a player that you think halfway through the season, you can go on and maybe you can take the third-round player that you drafted this year and then go and trade them for a first-round rookie pick the next offseason. And if you just say can do that, not even every year, because we know this is something that is not easy. It's one of the hardest things in Dynasty to do, to make sure that these players that are going to have very low hit rates, you can go through and you can try to just accumulate value on your roster. Well, you're not going to be doing that with these players that don't project to see any opportunity at all. You're not going to be doing that with the guys that it's going to be very hard for them to ever get a, just say, a 3-game stretch in there where maybe they're a wide receiver 2, maybe they are a running back jumping up into opportunity. And you're like, hey, if they're never going to get that shot, then essentially they're just never going to have the chance to go through and actually be worth that first round pick that we can flip them for halfway through the season. So those roster cloggers, those guys that you're drafting knowing I'm going to be holding on to this guy for the first 3 years of his NFL career, and then hopefully way down the line, then he can do something for us. I mean, trust me, it's very hard to avoid those players. I mean, I have a long list of guys that we have done this with. I mean, Leonte Carroo for Miami way back in the day was a player that was a roster clogger for me. I really liked the prospect profile coming in, and we just never saw him get on the field. We never saw him get ahead of Jarvis Landry or Kenny Stills, and I was kind of sitting there going, I like the talent, but if he's never going to get a shot, I am wasting a roster spot that you could be using by churning through players on the waiver wire. And also, a lot of those other guys that were getting drafted in that same range, if they eventually get an opportunity and they just flash slightly, then those dynasty owners that decided to draft a player right next to Leonte Carroo, maybe then they could go and flip for a profit. So let's try to identify some of these actual roster cloggers. But before we get into the players themselves, please, guys, if you have not already, go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. And also, I have a massive announcement for everybody over on Patreon. Please check out my recent post that we just sent out on Patreon. Essentially, what we are going to be doing from here on out is, I think at the end of the majority of videos, it obviously depends on how many questions y'all send in, I'm going to be playing a clip of what someone sends me through Patreon, just asking a question, something as simple as, hey Mason, who would you rather have in Dynasty, DJ Moore and T. Higgins, and why? I'm going to play that at the end of the video, and then I'll go through and give just a quick 60-second answer and my explanation behind that answer. So please, if you're on Patreon and you have any question, it doesn't matter how small it is, it doesn't matter how big it is, please go look at the post. That way you know how to get those clips to me. But that's it. Let's dive into it. And our first player we are going to be talking about as being a roster clogger, I mean, this is one of the easiest players you can identify in this entire draft, is going to be Tylan Wallace. And here with Tylan Wallace, if you look at Patreon with our recent rookie draft Superflex ADP, he is currently a mid-third round pick. And I want to admit, guys, I mean, before the draft, I had him ranked in the mid-second. I thought that this was someone that we were going to be very excited about. but he ends up falling to day 3 of the NFL draft. Now, yes, this maybe is due to his ACL injury that he suffered a few seasons ago, but here you're looking at Tylan Wallace and you're going, what is the best case scenario in the first 2 or 3 years of his NFL career? Because we know Hollywood Brown is still on that rookie contract. We know that he is going to be there for the next 2 years. They just took Rashad Bateman, a wide receiver that is significantly better than Tylan Wallace, a wide receiver that has a way more easier path to getting on the field and actually getting touches. So yeah, Bateman there, you have Hollywood Brown there, both wide receivers that are going to be getting a significant amount of snaps. And then on top of that, you have a bunch of other guys that are interesting. I mean, this team paid Sammy Watkins $8 million to come here this offseason. And I know I'm annoying when I talk about that because I know Sammy Watkins is not going to be someone that you're rostering for Dynasty expecting anything from. But they don't pay a wide receiver $8 million for him not to get on the football field. That just simply doesn't happen. So Sammy Watkins is going to be getting his own snaps. And they also have some former intriguing third-round NFL draft picks. I mean, a slightly more team investment than Tylan Wallace has himself. Now, I will say because the investment into Wallace is more recent, and we have already seen both Devin Duvernay and Miles Boykin try to get on the field and fail at doing so. In the case of Devin Duvernay, he's only had 1 year. So, yes, he still has some upside. But at this point, we're going with Tylan Wallace, with them bringing in all these other wide receivers, this being a very crowded wide receiver room, deceivingly. Also, he is playing in an offense that is never going to have a ton of passing volume. Because say you're this wide receiver that was a day 3 draft pick and you're going to a team that is very crowded, just say like the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, at least in that scenario, if somehow you can be a Scotty Miller and you can eventually get on the field, say somehow both Mike Evans and Chris Godwin get hurt, once you're on the field, you're going to produce because you're going to be in a scenario where there's passing volume to be had. But in Baltimore, even if Tylan Wallace can find a way to get on the field anytime soon, which I wouldn't expect for the first 2 seasons at the very minimum, he's still going to be playing in an offense where he's not going to have a ton of production. I mean, it's going to be very hard to ever see a path for Tylan Wallace to ever be worth a first-round rookie pick. And for that, I think that I'm just probably going to be avoiding him in the 3rd round. I think that's a price point that I really don't feel comfortable paying. I'd much prefer drafting a wide receiver like Nico Collins, who could be right away in 3 wide receiver sets for the Houston Texans. So yeah, Tylan Wallace, I am just out on completely at this price. And I have to admit, I ranked him significantly higher than this before the NFL draft, but you can't just completely ignore what happened. You can't completely ignore the situation that this player's in. So for that, Tylan Wallace, I mean, don't waste your time just clogging your roster. Okay, so now our next player, this is going to be a little bit of a different prototype. I just want to bring him up slightly and talk about why I'm not drafting him this year. It's going to be Anthony Schwartz. And I understand, guys. I mean, Anthony Schwartz is a player that is an elite athlete. I mean, it's hard to say for sure because you don't have the official combine measurables in. But if he had that 40 time at the actual NFL combine, this is a player that you could be looking at as being the fastest wide receiver, the fastest player in the NFL. I mean, he has that elite level speed, and this is what I'm concerned about. I'm concerned that Anthony Schwartz is a raw field stretching wide receiver playing on an offense that's not going to have a lot of passing volume. So here with Schwartz, it's a little bit of a different scenario where you can conceivably see, say, starting in 2022, that he could be an every down player for the Cleveland Browns. I mean, that is entirely possible. But I want everyone to understand that even if a player with this prototype for the Browns plays every single snap, he is still never going to be someone that you can confidently start on a week-to-week basis based on where he is going to be running his routes and based on what he is actually getting used for at the NFL level. Now, I know this is coming from someone who invested into Henry Ruggs last year, but Henry Ruggs was a top 15 pick in the NFL draft. Henry Ruggs went ahead of wide receivers like CeeDee Lamb, Jerry Jeudy, and we were looking at that going, yeah, of course we'd rather have CeeDee Lamb, of course we'd rather have Jerry Jeudy in Dynasty because those are going to be players that profile to see more targets. But Anthony Schwartz at this point is like a very poor man's Henry Ruggs, and it's sad to say, but there's just no real room for growth with that prototype of ever turning into a player that's going to see a 25% team target share. And if you're not going to see that type of volume and you're playing in one of the league's lowest passing volume offenses, I think at that point, Anthony Schwartz, he's also going to be someone that I'm looking to avoid. Not nearly to the extent as Tylan Wallace, because you can get Anthony Schwartz a little bit later. And like I said, you can actually see a path for him to start getting snaps as early as year 2. So Anthony Schwartz, I mean, yes, if he falls to you, say in the late 4th, there you can go for him. But please don't be pushing him up ahead of a guy like Chuba Hubbard, where we know Hubbard has a clear path that if Christian McCaffrey gets hurt, he's automatically going in your starting lineup. We know that at that point, he's worth at the very least a 2nd and a 3rd round rookie pick, depending on how he plays. Maybe someone that is just desperate to be a contender will pay a 1st for him. And Anthony Schwartz just simply doesn't have that type of upside. Okay, so now let's go over to a very boring wide receiver real quick. I am going to talk about this maybe for 30 seconds, but let's talk about Seth Williams. And I just want to reiterate, guys, that almost every single year, there's a player that gets pumped up in the Dynasty community. Every single year, there's a player that is the quote-unquote sleeper. They go extremely late in the NFL draft. They fall to a depth chart where really they have no path to ever seeing opportunity. And I know that a player like Seth Williams, you like the name before, you like the profile, but based on the draft capital, also based on the situation of him going to Denver, I mean, where they have Cortland Sutton, Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, Noah Fant, Albert O, Javonte Williams, when they have those players getting so many touches in that offense, there is literally no path for a 6th round compensatory pick wide receiver to really boost any kind of value over the next 3 years. So Seth Williams, he's completely off my draft board. I mean, if you have a late pick like that, literally I would just trade it to move up 1 spot earlier in the draft, just anything, and clear up that roster spot for someone you can churn on the wire. Okay, so now I said at the beginning of the video that I fall victim to the same thing all the time. I fall victim to seeing a wide receiver that I really like talent profile of, and I go in myself, I draft them. That's why I'm kind of making this video. I'm trying to kind of remind myself that you don't win Dynasty by going, hey, this wide receiver has slightly more talent than other players in this range. Let's draft them. And hopefully, eventually, he finally sees an opportunity to be a wide receiver 3. No, that's not what you do. You're trying to target players that, yeah, maybe they're long shots, but best case scenario, they are worth a 1st round pick that you can then flip afterwards. And here, let's talk about Jalen Darden. And here, y'all know with Darden, we've already came on record saying, hey, he's a slot wide receiver getting drafted in the 4th round of the NFL draft, very similar to Amon-Ra St. Brown. I mean, that player's not dead. We understand that it's the exact opposite of an Anthony Schwartz type scenario where the NFL is never really going to value those slot wide receivers equivalent to their dynasty and fantasy football value, because this is the prototype of a player that if he gets on the field, he should be getting heavily targeted. And Jalen Darden, I mean, the production profile is ridiculous. He accounted for over 50% of the overall receiving production for his collegiate offense. Now, I know it's a very small school, but nonetheless, you can't ignore that. You can't ignore the fact that I believe he had like 75% of his team's receiving touchdowns that year. Now, please don't look me up on that. I am just going off of memory. I could be wrong on that, but nonetheless, I mean, Jalen Darden, he has the production profile, and he gets decent draft capital considering the type of player he is and what role he's going to play on an NFL offense. Yet he's going to a scenario where we go, okay, there are a ton of guys here. I mean, you have Mike Evans. You have Chris Godwin, one of the best wide receiver duos in the entire NFL. Now, you throw in the fact that there are other players in this offense, a guy like Scotty Miller, who was really good last year. You also had a guy like Tyler Johnson, who was good in the opportunity that he saw as well. So now Jalen Darden's going to a wide receiver room where you go, okay, yeah, we really like the talent, but he's the wide receiver 5 here. So this is a scenario where I'm bringing up saying, I've fallen for this. I've done the same exact thing where instead of just going through and taking those 3rd, 4th round rookie picks that we have, if you don't get a guy like you like a Nico Collins or like a Chuba Hubbard, then at that point, you just trade the pick for anything. I mean, literally what you can do is if say you have a 3rd and a 4th, you take those picks, you go, hey, let's try to package them together with a player on our bench and let's go get a 2nd next year. Because if that 2nd ends up becoming the 202, then at that point you have a prospect that may actually have a very nice profile, a prospect that may actually see that boost in dynasty value starting in year 1. But more importantly, you don't have that prospect from the 2021 draft class sitting on your dynasty roster for the next 3 seasons doing nothing. You can't start them. They have no opportunity to go through and ever get that spike in value where then you can go through and flip that roster spot for additional value. So yeah, Jalen Darden. I mean, guys, I fall for this all the time on my own. I know that some of these wide receivers are exciting, but at the end of the day, I mean, we have to understand what we are looking for in the later rounds, and we are not looking for a guy that we think has some talent that can sit around on our roster for 3 years, just making sure we can't use that roster spot, making sure we are just kind of burning a hole there. No, take those shots on those high upside players where if they hit, then you can flip them for a first-round rookie pick down the line, and if they don't, who cares? It's a 3rd or 4th round pick. The historical hit rate is extremely low regardless. You're going to cut that player. You're going to move on. You're going to turn the waiver wire. And yeah, that's all I got for y'all. I really hope y'all enjoyed this video. I really hope y'all got something from it. Of course, if y'all did, go down there, drop a like, leave a comment, subscribe to the channel. It helps us out a ton. And I'll see y'all with the video tomorrow. Thank you so much for everyone supporting the show on Patreon. And Dominic, Jim, Carl, Jesse, Tyler, Eric, Colby, Cameron, Mike, and Marcus, thank you guys.